It is lovely to be here in Victoria. We just arrived and we're off to the Nurturing Healthy Communities Conference at Christ Church Cathedral in Victoria. And it is great to be here. I'm very much looking forward to the adventure. And so what I'm going to be talking about at the conference later on this evening, as a matter of fact, is compassion in the 21st century. What does that actually look like? What is compassion? What does that mean for me? And how in the 21st century do I actually be compassionate, if that is even at all possible? One of the things that I find interesting about this building and this space is that these stained glass windows along the upper level here are referring to fishing and industry and architecture and lumbering and law. And for the past number of generations here in Victoria and in churches around the world, there has been this connection to the outside world. Churches, cathedrals are built because they're places of safety and security and holiness and all that wonderful stuff. And there's a constant reference out to the outside world. That's diaconia. That's what deacons do.
Discernment is living a life in awareness. We tend to use the word discernment or the verb discern in a religious context to talk about God's call. But the reality is, if you live your life, you can live it mindlessly or you can live it thoughtfully. And discernment captures, at least in part, the thoughtful. There are other elements to discernment as well in terms of faith and trust.
I became really very aware many years ago while I was working as a nurse that there was something missing. There was something more that I should be doing, but was ignoring what some people might call a sense of call. I didn't want to be doing anymore, but that still small voice became a very loud voice, and I kept hearing, go and serve my people. And I would sort of brush it off and get very busy at work and with my family and children, and that voice would come back again, go and serve my people, come and serve my people. And then called me by name and serve my people. And I realized I couldn't ignore that anymore.
Diaconia is service, literally service, and deacons are, for the church, I believe, the icon of what that service is to be. Deacons have the ability to be in various aspects of the world in which we live, engaged in various works and involvements in community, are able to see this is where need is, and are able to say to the church, here is need that we could respond to, and then are able to take that response, coordinate that response in some way, and take that then to that place where there is need. In the United States, there is a wonderful story that comes out of the 1960s for a bishop of Montana who, during the course of a meeting about vocations, was asked how many vocations he had in the Diocese of Montana. And he said, well, I do know that from one of the high schools, 2 individuals have gone to college to study medicine, and 3 individuals have gone to study education to become teachers, and went through a list of that kind of description. And the person stopped him and said, no, Bishop, how many vocations have you had in the Diocese of Montana? And the bishop said, I'm telling you how many vocations. People are called to ministry in a variety of ways, and whether one is a teacher or a nurse or a doctor or a lawyer or you can have that sense of vocation, which is also what I think you're asking about those who have gone into ordained ministry. And when the church realizes that one is called to a vocation and ministry in a variety of ways and at different times in one's life, that will be an important understanding for the church to have received.
I've had the privilege of working closely with the bishop and with the archdeacon of the diocese to nurture and be present to the shifts in the way in which diaconal ministry is growing and forming. There is historically, and it goes back to the early church, a close relationship between bishops and deacons. And that continues in the way in which the diaconate is experienced and lived out in this diocese and elsewhere. Liturgically, the bishop always has a deacon with him in large celebrations within the church. And we may not always be the bishop's chaplain, but we are there to assist, to be of service, to represent that icon with the bishop.
We're really, really pleased here at the Cathedral to be hosting this conference. One of the things I want to say that Alistair will leave you with is something to take away. He will give you some tools to use, and he'll give you something to take away. He will not just speak this evening and leave it at that, but he'll send you off with something very, very important. So, would you help me to welcome Alistair?
I want to thank you all for coming, for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I want to start this morning, or this morning, I want to start this evening, quick reflection about Genesis. And those of you who know the book of Genesis or have read any parts of it, I'm talking about the very, very beginning of Genesis, the first creation story. There are two creation stories, but mushed together, the first great mashup. First creation story, the big picture, the big universe kind of stuff, the 7 days. And beginning at about day 3, the Creator starts this line. So after he's finished, he or she or it has finished creating for that day, and God saw that it was good. And God saw that it was good. And one of the interesting things about all of the wisdom traditions across the planet is that it's good. That the planet and the creation is good. Bad things happen. The technical theological term is shit happens. And God saw that it was good. So I want to start there. If we're going to talk about compassion, let's understand that from a spiritual, from a wisdom tradition perspective, life is good. Next slide. Don't go outside because it's scary. Don't play on the streets because it's scary. Don't go down that particular street because all of the fear. Are you with me here? I want to suggest to you that compassion is actually an antidote to fear. It's a different frame. It's the opposite frame. It says, hang on a second. Yes, let's not be silly. There's a whole bunch of bad out there. But let's not make that rule our lives. So here's an example. The market. So I work in credit union land. I work in financial services. I understand how money works. I'm going to let you in a little secret. The market works on 2 emotions. here, you're going to graduate, you're not going to have Bachelor of Economics degrees in the next 30 seconds. Because the market operates on two emotions, fear and greed. Congratulations. You all have degrees. What about if we started to think a little differently? That if we brought compassion into it. Another story from the wisdom tradition, this time from the Christian tradition. The story of the Good Samaritan. Now, the Good Samaritan, interesting, really cool story. Really cool stuff about the Good Samaritan. First of all, the Good Samaritan is told only in the Gospel of Luke. It shows up in no other gospel, and it shows up in a really interesting place. Jesus is arguing with a lawyer, right? No, I won't do the joke. So Jesus is arguing with the lawyer, and the lawyer says, what's the most important commandment? Remember Hillel, right? What's the most important commandment? And Jesus says, oh, come on, man, you know that. And the lawyer says, yeah, it's love God and love neighbor. And Jesus says, yes, you're exactly right. And the lawyer says, but who's my neighbor? It's kind of like a Fox News interview, right? Who's my neighbor? And Jesus says, there was a man walking from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And he was set upon by robbers who beat him almost to death and left him naked by the side of the road. A man, a priest of the temple, walks by and goes around him. Another man, a Levite, a kind of deacon, walks by, goes around him. A third man, a Samaritan. Now, here in 21st century Victoria, Samaritan, Schmaritan doesn't really mean much to us. This would be like if this were present-day Israel, this would be like an Israeli man lying naked and beaten by the side of the road, and a young man who grew up in a Palestinian refugee camp stops to help him. That is how profound the Samaritan is for the first hearers of this story. This is a knock your socks off oddity. This cannot happen in our understanding of the world, that a Samaritan would stop and help. And not only does he help, he cleans the guy up, he takes him to an inn, he gives the innkeeper some money and says, look after this guy for a few days, I'll be back to check in. This is an amazing story. And then Jesus says, so which of these guys was the neighbor? And the lawyer says, the one who showed him compassion. The one who showed him, in the language, mercy. Next slide. Rachel Remen. Now, Rachel Remen is an American healthcare reformer. And that's not an oxymoron. An American healthcare reformer, amazing lady. And this is a quote from a very short essay that she wrote that was published in 1997. And I'll read it for you. Service rests on the basic premise that the nature of life is sacred, that life is a holy mystery which has an unknown purpose. Here's where, when we serve, we know that we belong to life and to that purpose. Fundamentally, helping, fixing, and service are ways of seeing life. I love this. When you help, you see life as weak. When you fix, you see life as broken. When you serve, you see life as whole.
I'm Beth, and I work at the Rainbow Kitchen every Monday. I'm called our team leader, and that means I look after scheduling for our day, making sure there's enough people and that the people are distributed and doing their jobs. We had so much fun on Monday mornings, we really did. We had a good congenial group that worked together. It really made it worthwhile coming when you heard things like Rainbow Kitchen keeps me alive. We serve a variety of lunches. A lot of it depends on what has been donated to us. And often we come in the morning and it's sort of, well, what are we cooking today? What's in the fridge? What can we use? And so a lot of the cooks are sort of flying by the seat of their pants and planning the menus. Generally, we always have a hot main entree. We usually cook fresh vegetables, sometimes frozen, but we prefer to do fresh if we can. We also have bread donated to us from several sources. So there's a large table full of bread that people can pick up and take home with them. And we have a good time, and we have such a good feeling for what we're doing, and we see all these happy faces leaving and all the thanks that we get. So many people, as they're walking out the door, they holler thanks, and off they go, and with their bags of bread under their arms and a full tummy. Yeah.
Good girl, good girl. This is yours. This place is the best all over Victoria. I like this place. Good community, serve good, they talk nice to each other, and they are on time with everything.
I don't wanna be young. I don't wanna be called 16 times.
My understanding was that Rainbow Kitchen started originally around 2000 in St. Saviour's Church, and it was intended to provide a place for women to come because some of the other meal programs in Victoria were quite rough in terms of the street people, and so women felt unsafe. And so St. Saviour's recognized there was a need, and the intention was for women and children to have a safe place to come.
Early on at my start at St. George's, Garth Walmsley, who was at that time the president of the Rainbow Kitchen Society, approached me and asked if I would like to be involved in this ministry. I didn't take too long to think about it because I thought the Rainbow Kitchen was a very important ministry. I think a huge part of the Christian ministry is actually explicitly and deliberately responding to the needs in the community around you. There are people who are hungry. There are people who need housing. There are people that just need someone to talk to or someone to pray with them. And they're big needs, and it's real ministry.
I enjoy coming here because I like it here. Lots of friends. It's like a family. It's like a family here. It's really fun.
They've decided that they wish to be officially married, and they've asked me to officiate at their wedding. And I do believe we had the world's biggest three-person hug.
We did. Yes.
Thank you.
Well, we love you. That's why we want you.
Yeah, we sure do. We sure do.
Thank you.
I believe that we are put on this earth to serve Christ. People recognize that in the community, which gives us an opportunity to help them. I think I am recognizing the face of Christ in the people that I'm helping. And each year as I go by in this diaconate process, the feeling, the recognition of Christ in other people becomes stronger.
Years ago, when I was chaplain in the hospital, I went to visit this lady that wasn't at all well, and she wasn't getting better. And I was curious about that, and at that time I was able to look at her chart. And I looked at her chart, and I could see that the woman was really anxious. She hadn't seen a daughter for a while that was on the street, And what she was most anxious about was her cat. She was having to stay in the hospital longer, and she was really worried about the cat and wanted the cat to go to the vets. So I went to the social work, I went to the nurse, did all the stuff, and I got permission to go and get her cat. And I took my daughter with me, who is wonderful with animals, and we took the cat to the vet. So then I went back to the hospital and told her that her cat was in the vet, and she was much more relaxed. Well, 2 years later, the then chaplain at the hospital phoned me and said, "Do you remember Dolly ministering to so-and-so about a cat?" And I said, "Yes, I do." She says, "Do you know that that action turned that woman's faith around?" So I thought, you sometimes never ever hear what good you do or what good you don't do. And so that really touched my heart.
Presently, I'm discerning a call towards the diaconate, which, as I've come to understand it, is a call towards service, particularly like a service that helps to bridge the gap between the church and the world. As I've come to understand it, the diaconate is the one who goes out and embodies, like the earthly Christ. You have the threefold ministry of the church, and you have the bishop, who's kind of the All-Father, the priest is the Holy Spirit and consecrates the vessels. Then you have the deacon that actually goes out into the world and tries to make that bridge between the two cultures of the church world and the earthly world.
So for the last 15 years, I've felt this call to, in different ways, reimagine church and live it deeply as a day in, day out experience. I've spent the last 4 years of my life living in what's called a new monastic community, which I co-founded with some other folks in Toronto. And it was really an attempt to bring the monastic impulse of life into the lives of all of us. And we lived together in a common house and opened up our space. It was actually a church rectory, parish rectory, opened up our space so that any number of people from the neighborhood, often people living on the margins of society, would come and hang out. Prior to that, I lived in a Christian community house for 5 years, very similar to that, and even more intensive in some ways, where we had kind of 10 rooms in the house, and there were so-called homeless people or people who just needed a space to stay, needed a place to be in community, came to live.
I'm standing here in the middle of the labyrinth. And by tradition, this is where your heart is open to God. This is where there's the intimate encounter of love. And this is a good image, a good reality for discernment as we go to understand God and to do God's will. The reality is that as you come to this place and from the world in your discernment, it's a very complex exploration. There is no exact path laid out for you. You can only understand the path to some degree as you look back. As you see, oh, I went there and I went there and I went there. Oh yes, that's where I took that turn. The reality is the labyrinth that I will be in tomorrow, the labyrinth of the rest of my life. I have to go forward in faith and exploration and come to this centering place without a path being laid down in brick and stone as we have here, where it is so clear when I go forward, when I go left, when I go right. That I see in the rearview mirror. Here I come in exploration and faith.
My name's Anthony Douncer, and I come from New Zealand, where I work for the Anglican Church as an archdeacon and their social justice commissioner. And I've come to this conference, which I'm really pleased to be at. Come to this conference because I heard about it through Marion, one of the members of the cathedral, when she was in New Zealand. And there was just a lot of synchronicity between what was going on here and what we've been trying to do, at least, back in New Zealand for the last 6 or 7 years. So it's an opportunity to come and share our story and learn from what's going on here. The commission was put into place by the General Synod of the Anglican Church. And it was put in place as a three tikanga commission. And it had a very broad, and still has, a very broad remit. Everything from policy, advice and engagement with government policy and research and so on, to public advocacy, to theological education, developing resources. From that, you start making decisions. And strategically, the Commission started making some decisions about the fact that it wanted to be focused on recognizing and enforcing the fact that justice is something everybody is involved in. It's something that we do where we are, and we take seriously the context, the place in which we stand. And so we do what we can where we are. So being just where we are is intended to sound like it should be simple. We've worked really closely with not-for-profits, NGOs, people in agencies involved in domestic violence work and other areas, climate change work and so on, because we've recognized, about 2006 or so, we recognized that this is the space in which the voice of the church needs to be collaboratively alongside and yet distinctive at the same time. So we don't get rid of our faith base. We have a distinctiveness, but it's a collaboration working alongside our partner agencies because we're all seeking the same outcome. We often think of basically holiness and compassion are really two sides of the same coin. That's what I probably want to say here. That what we would call compassion, we could equally call holiness, which isn't to say to venerate someone because they're holy. It's to talk about right living, or the kind of living where we allow ourselves to be transformed and allow ourselves to become more courageous than we ever dreamed that we could be.
Well, it's been a great afternoon here, and on behalf of the Victoria Labour Council, of which I'm the president, I really appreciate the opportunity to come to the cathedral today and have a bit of a discussion with a number of people about an issue that's really important to myself and to the Labour movement, and I think to the church, which is the issue of the growing poverty that we have in our community. We've seen that in the last couple of years, a dramatic increase in the number of children and families who live in poverty, and that's something that should be a concern to everyone.
So welcome to our place. I'm the Executive Director, my name is John Evans, and I'd like you to take you on a tour through the building. Right now we're standing in the reception of the housing, and we have 45 units of individual units for supportive housing. And these are people that have been street entrenched for a long period of time that we'll bring in here, and we'll have a mental health specialist, an addictions counselor, and outreach workers that will work with them on a regular basis, pretty intensely, for a period of approximately 2 years, and get them to the point where they can then transition out into their own independent living. So we deal with quite a diverse population here. We have a lot of people that are homeless. Most of the people are living in poverty and have addiction issues, mental health issues, a lot of physical limitations. Right now we're walking down into the drop-in center. The drop-in center is open each day from about 7 in the morning till 5 at night. We have 8 outreach workers on hand that can meet with the family members and deal with any of their situations, whether they're looking for housing, trying to get on disability, getting into detox or recovery, any kind of challenges that they need. If they need a bus ticket, get to a funeral, they can connect with an outreach worker and get some assistance. So this is our memorial wall. These are all people that have passed away since we opened up 5 years ago. There's quite a number of them, and it's one of the hardest things for me is seeing the numbers of people that pass away from this community. You know, the average age is probably in their 40s, so it's you know, a pretty stark reality of people that are living on the street and living in poverty, that the life expectancy is so short. So this is our clothing area. So what we do is we stock up this area every morning, and people can come in and help themselves to a couple pieces of clothing every day. All the clothing is donated, mostly through the different churches in the community. As we move over this way, we come to a little recreational area where we have a TV set up where people can watch TV, and we also have a pool table that people can just relax and enjoy a little bit of recreation time.
Don, I was really quite excited when I heard that you were coming not only to the ministry here at our place, but when I discovered that you were in process of working on your vocation, discerning vocation to the diaconate within your denomination, and it seemed such a wonderful fit. So it was quite exciting to meet you and hear some of your story.
Well, my background was business and finance, and that's where I spent most of my career. And it wasn't until, you know, I had some personal struggles that took me to looking at social justice and poverty, and started, you know, my journey started volunteering in the downtown east side, and it took me to a place of this deep sense of passion and compassion for other people.
That's wonderful to hear that, because what I'm also hearing is a resonance with my own journey. That sense of that unerring developing awareness of a need for change, a need for working within one's own being, one's own faith perspective with compassion towards those systemic issues. And I love the word surprise, because I didn't know anything about the diaconate either.
Having gone through several years of struggling between trying to earn a living and succeed in life, and also looking at the brokenness of the world and struggling with that internal conflict, you know, over several years, and finally, you know, the passion for social justice was much stronger than the you know, the draw of succeeding and earning a lot of money, and so that was kind of a shift in my life.
There is that, I think what you're naming is that false separation of them and us.
Definitely.
And which has so many devastating effects, not only for people who are in that particular sort of brokenness, because we're all broken. Addictions is sometimes a more obvious face of brokenness, but there are so many other forms. And it's that struggle to break through that, cross that abyss.
When we allow ourselves to move through that, we allow ourselves to receive the gifts of others that are in their brokenness. And I think we often write off people, and we think that they don't have anything to offer us. And boy, we're making a big mistake, because my experience here is been so much different. You know, I try to have lunch with the family here, and we call them family instead of guests or clients, because they are a family, and they're part of the human family. And allowing the opportunity for me to get to know them has brought me so many gifts. Can you just tell us a little bit about how our place has helped you in your journey over this past while?
When I first came down, it was the old church here. I came down looking for my daughter, trying to save her life. I got very comfortable after a few months, ended up on the streets myself, and no responsibilities. I didn't have to answer to people. I used our place and other shelters around here to shower, eat, sleep, use. It's been a lot of letting go, but healthy letting go, and change again with the new people coming in, but it's always been good. And I'm slowly starting to learn how to trust, and my attitude changes. I'm not cursing and cussing as much as I did when I first started working here, like, why didn't they clean that bathroom right, and why did they do this? Well, those things aren't important to me anymore. It's like, oh, well, that's their best, and I shouldn't complain, because I'm not perfect either.
The conference, one of our places to stop was Karen Armstrong's Charter for Compassion, and looking at compassion as the overarching concept for looking at the 4 areas, and addictions, mental health was such a key area in that.
I think it was somehow we were on the same wavelength when it came to compassion, and I think that really compassion is the answer to all of our community problems. If folks could take a minute from their busy lives and just slow down and recognize that the answers, the simple answers that they immediately leap to aren't going to work, because the issues are far more complex than that. And it'd be lovely to see more and more members of the community open their hearts, as you did and have done and continue to do. And I think it's infectious. I think we're seeing that growing through the church community and through the larger community. As much as I believe that addiction services, for instance, are woefully underfunded, there's never been a day as good as today. We're making progress a little bit at a time. So I thank you for that.
My name is Tommy Henderson. I'm from the lands of the Nakotok Nation, and we're far removed from where we are now. We were forcibly removed from our homelands to Port Hardy. And that move caused drastic changes in the lives of our people. It went from night to day, or day to night, whatever the case may be. And we've suffered because of that. Now today we're trying to bring back our values, our traditions, our culture, our language, all of that that's so important to our well-being. Without that, we were kind of a lost generation, and it's difficult. You go up to the school and try and teach a language that our kids hardly ever hear, and try to explain to them what values really mean. Not monetary values, values that you hold dear in your hearts, in your minds, your spirit, your very being. And we were taught that when we were growing up, and our kids now, it's so different. They're raised in an environment where it's totally, it's not part of our culture, our traditions, our history, our very lives, and we're trying to bring that back. Their teachings, their learning, not just by the books in school, but from the heart and our Creator.
The gospel says that you are on a journey, and that you shall stumble, but you shall be raised up, so long as you just keep on at it. Which is not to say like the gospel is like the ultimate self-help program. I mean, N.T. Wright has said this better. Like, Jesus doesn't doesn't come into the world to help you find out who you are. Jesus tells you who you are, and then commands you to go out and serve your neighbor.
There's been a lot of assumptions for probably 1,700 years in the church, that we call Christendom. This whole sort of notion that church is at the center of society, the center of the city, the center of the village, the center of people's lives. And that's, if it hasn't radically shifted already, it's radically shifting really quickly. And that means that there's polarities, there's separations, that the church in particular is experiencing this disconnect from Christendom. And I actually think that's really beautiful and hopeful, because I think there's some side effects of Christendom that haven't been very helpful to the spiritual life of the church. But the outcome of that means that we need more bridging, because those kind of connectors that were there in the past are gone. And I think diaconal ministry is especially positioned to do that well, because it by its very nature, at least in theory and hopefully increasingly in practice, is outward looking. It is on the edges of the church, and it's hard to build a bridge into the middle of something. You really are sort of building a bridge to the edge of the castle over the moat or whatever.
I think if we listen, even to one person at a time, I think that's where you accomplish more.
Like I said earlier about the goal, I'm not so worried about what the goal is at the end. I'm more concerned now about the day, the daily journey. So, yeah, there's a question mark, what's at the end? I think that's probably for everybody.
Restores lost innocence, brings mourners joy. Night truly blessed, where heaven is wedded to earth.
We're going to talk about compassion. Let's understand that from a spiritual, from a wisdom tradition perspective, life is good.
First, I was really worried about showing them, and I thought, how could I be so silly to be worried about when I knew where they came from? So then I thought, oh, I got to show the world.
You need to look after each other, and that it's only when we look after each other that we can really find the kind of courageousness to live justly in the world.